Today, I have the joy of talking to Rocio Carranza, a Texas native who was able to come back and fulfill her dream of being an author. We talk about her debut novel, Blood of the Blackthorn, including our favorite characters, our not so favorite characters, our favorite moments, and how things changed and evolved as she went through different drafts. We also talk about what is upcoming and on the horizon for her as an author, as well as advice for anyone looking to write their first novel. I know I say this every time, but it was an absolutely great conversation, so I hope you guys enjoy. Welcome to Busy Reading Romantasy, a video podcast that discusses books that merge elements of romance and fantasy while occasionally exploring other genres. We get to escape our world and dive deep into themes of good versus evil, power dynamics, and all of the delicious taboo topics. Curiosity and open-mindedness are a must. That being said, this is a podcast for mature audiences only and will contain spoilers. Your mental health matters, so be sure to check the trigger warnings of each book to decide if this is the right episode for you to listen to. Now, let's get into today's episode.
Austin.
Okay, that's right. I did read that. I actually lived in Pflugerville for a few years in my high school days. So
my house is actually in Pflugerville. I'm just in Austin. That's where I have my business and stuff. So
yeah.
Austin.
That's so funny. You're like the second person I've ever met outside of living there, because I think normal person, you say like Pflugerville and they're like, oh, what?
Who? How do you spell that? And then it's spelled weird too, so that makes it worse.
It's the PF, so then everything becomes PF. So like I remember the Pflugerfest, and you're just like,
oh my gosh. Everyone's like, is it Puffa? And I was like, no, just pretend the P doesn't exist.
The Pflugerville? And I'm like, yes, that is where I'm from. Thank you. How long have you been living in Austin?
For about since 2022.
Okay.
Yeah. So it's been about 3 years.
Amazing.
I literally can't believe it's been 3 years. But what's funny is I was actually born in Austin, but my parents are both in the military. So I literally only stayed here for like 3 days and then moved to Washington State, where they were stationed at.
Oh, no. Okay. So where did you live in Washington State? Because I'm originally from Seattle.
Oh my God. And you know what's, oh my God, small world. So what's funny was we lived in Washington State for maybe a couple more years, or like 2 years, where my sister ended up being born there. Then we came back and lived in San Antonio, Texas. And my parents were stationed over at Fort Sam Houston. And that's pretty much where we stayed the majority of my life. So I was raised in San Antonio. Every now and then, like every couple of years, we would go somewhere, but we always came back. So anytime someone asks me where I'm raised, I'm like, I was raised in San Antonio. That's where I was raised. But I was like, I joined the military and then I went all over the place, including to Washington. I love Seattle. Oh my God. Oh, it's so beautiful. I need to go back there. But yeah, I was stationed up in Washington for a while, a couple years. And then, I just ended up right back. And when I got out of the military, I was like, well, I want to go back to my birthplace to see what it's all about. So here I am.
Oh, how do you like it so far? I loved it there.
I love it. I love it. I love the vibes. You know, it's just awesome. And people are so friendly here. So
that is true. I remember going from Seattle. We live like right outside of Seattle in Bellevue, but same thing.
Bellevue.
And going from there to Texas. And I just remember like one of the first things I was like, the roads are just so huge. Like there's so much space everywhere. And I'm like, oh, this is great.
Because what is it? It's the 5. Is it the 5 over in Seattle? There's only like one highway to get from like Tacoma to Seattle. And if that highway is shut down, forget it. You're just like, you're there forever.
Yes. Oh, yes. And I even like going back to visit in Texas, I don't miss the traffic in the highway. That's also insanity. And that's saying something, because I live in Florida now, and that's like known for some pretty crazy driving. But same thing. I love Seattle, and I always just felt like I didn't fit in there. So I have really enjoyed my time in Florida. I feel like there's a special brand of craziness here that I like just fit in. And I'm like, yes, this feels good. So
I need to visit. I've yet to visit Florida. I need
Yeah.
to go.
Oh, come, we have so many bookish events. I've been
Yeah,
going crazy
exactly.
this year, so it's exciting. Yeah. But okay, awesome. So I would love to start with kind of just a little bit of your background, and like what were some of your favorite books growing up reading a lot?
Oh wow.
I know it's a big question.
I know. No, it's okay. I always read growing up, but what's so funny is my mom would watch a lot of true crime, like Unsolved Mysteries
Mm,
back when they had the original host or whatever.
mhm.
And she was all into like true crime, Stephen King. So I, as a kid, I would be over here reading like The Girl Who Loved Tom Gordon by Stephen King and like all these
Gotcha.
horror books, James Patterson. And then when I started getting like to teenage age, I started getting more into like YA. And
Mhm,
I will say the books that changed my life was absolutely The Hunger Games for sure.
mhm. Good
I
one.
am a Hunger Games stan, will always be a Hunger Games stan. I do at least a reread of it every year,
That's
like
amazing.
clockwork. But of course, if we're going to go into the weeds, like I also read Twilight. I
Mhm.
also, I feel like that was like the coming of age thing for every teenager at that time to read
Yeah,
like
yeah.
Twilight.
Yes, yeah, and going back to the Hunger Games, like, I remember when the first movie came out, and
Oh
I
my God.
was, I think, in high school, like, early days of high school,
Hmm.
and, I remember going to see it with my mom and being in that age group and having a younger sister, like, I remember being in tears when Katniss is like,
Yes.
"I volunteer!" Like, it hits you hard when you're
Yes.
younger and just newer to all of these things.
Oh my God. And it's so fresh too. And I remember being so excited because I think I had finished the second book when the first movie was like being announced. And I was
Yeah.
like, oh my God. I'm like, it was like an event. And I'm one of five kids and I'm the oldest. So I was like, we all gotta go. I don't
Yeah.
care what we do. I will give
Come
up
on, children.
everything just as long as we go to this movie.
Yeah. Oh my goodness. Yeah. And that's another thing they have in common. I am also the oldest of multiple siblings, so I
Yeah.
totally get that as well. Um, yeah. Oh, great, great memories. I've really enjoyed bringing that into the conversation lately because I've been thinking more about the types of stuff that I read as a kid and
Hmm.
teen and just how it shapes you as a person.
Yes.
Um, yeah, so I would love to know, how did you get started in writing?
Oh my goodness. So I always loved writing. And but as I, got older, I was very much discouraged from writing and told like, oh, you got to do something more practical. You got to like,
Mhm,
why don't you just join the military? Because both my parents are in the military. So that's I ended up going to college, went to RTC, and it kind of was something in like the back of my mind I would do on occasion, but like kind of like
mhm,
lost it a bit. And then it wasn't until I actually left the military a couple years ago that I was like, okay, well, now I'm back in civilian life and
mhm,
what am I going to do with my life? And we moved back to Austin and I just started writing. I had a corporate job at the time, but
mhm,
like I wasn't feeling very fulfilled. And I was like, I got to do something. Like I have all these like ideas and stuff. So I started writing and then I started freelance editing for people. And then I
mhm.
was like, but I want to be I was like, I want to be the main character though.
Right.
Like I want to write something that's mine. Um and that's kind of how I got into it. I started writing short stories that I would submit to magazines because I was
Mhm,
like, okay, short stories are like a good way to get my feet wet. And I also have this other job too that I'm doing. So I didn't want to like overcommit. So it was kind of one of those exit strategy things where it's like, okay, let's make a plan and make it gradual.
mhm,
Um, all the way up until the point where I finally decided, okay, I'm going to commit to writing my first novel because writing short stories in a novel is it's a completely different beast.
I can imagine, yeah.
um, but yeah, after I, you know, finally was like, okay, I know what I'm doing. I know my writing style. I committed to writing my first novel. I decided to just go all into it, and then I found my lovely editor Heather from Simply Spellbound Edits, um, and it was just from there. Like it was
Mhm,
just all right. we're truck riding
We're on
downhill.
it now.
Let's
Yeah.
do it. Yeah. And
Oh,
everything, as they say, is history.
yeah, yeah. Oh, well, that's amazing. First off, I commend you because I think a lot of us can relate to this feeling of being younger and having these dreams and
Yeah.
kind of having to face reality where I think we're often um, somewhat encouraged to follow our dreams, but also like we have to have
Yeah.
practicality in something that
Hmm.
is maybe more reliable and feasible. So I'm so happy to hear that you were able to come back to writing. That is
Yeah.
absolutely amazing. And so, what was the process of writing your first novel? Yeah.
So I am a lovely neurodivergent, and I had literally probably about 25 to 30 different works in progresses as I was
Wow.
like, yeah, and as I was going through, and I'm what they call a plantser, which is a
Okay.
mix between a planner and a pantser. So
Yep.
I'll literally fly off the seat of my pants and I'm like, okay, this scene is really like resonating with me. I need to write it down, etc. And then later on I'll come out with outline and kind of make it all, put the puzzle pieces together.
Yeah.
When I was writing, when I finally decided to write this novel, I was like, okay, I got to get my ideas together, right? I got to make sure that if I'm going to commit to writing a novel, I can only do one at a time. Come on, you
Mhm.
can't do two at a
Yeah.
time. And I was like, okay, I got to put all the short stories I'm also doing, on the back burner. I just have to commit to this. And so
Mhm.
it was between the adult fantasy novel, which I am writing, or which I am about to publish,
Mhm.
and a literary fiction novel. And it literally took me some time where I was like, okay, which one do I really want to commit to? Because I was in love with them both. And
Mhm.
I was finally like, I just want to have fun.
Mhm.
Let's have fun with this first book. Let's, do an adult fantasy novel because I also love fantasy and I love reading fantasy. So let's just get that done. And, that's pretty
Yeah.
much where my decision making happened.
Yeah, amazing. I love that. And just as a non-writer,
Mhm.
I'm curious, did you have any um, like I want to say traditions, but I don't think that's the right word of like, getting in the zone to write, or it's just kind of you just showed up and you were ready to go.
I literally would write when I was at my corporate job, whenever I had lunch or a break or anything like that, I was
Uh-huh.
writing. I was at that computer or like my personal like phone or whatever, and I was typing. I was like, okay,
Mhm.
I'm just like putting all these scenes out there. And like I said earlier, I'm a planter, so I was very much putting, okay, this is a scene I see like in my head. I gotta write it down or
Mhm.
I'm gonna forget it. Because it's one
Mhm.
of those shower thoughts thing where you're like, oh, I'll get to it later, and then you'll completely forget it. So I
Yeah,
was
that
over
makes sense.
here. Yeah, I was over here on every break and everything, just like writing it down. And
Yeah.
then finally I was like, okay, let's put an outline together. Let's clean it up and make sure it
Right.
all is cohesive and makes sense, right?
Yeah.
So once I started getting the outline together, the story really started to flesh itself out. And I was like, oh, I am
Mhm.
now able to create new scenes based off of like this thing I never even thought about as I'm like
Mhm.
reading the scenes over again more in like chronological order, like, oh my god, I never would have thought about this particular scene happening had I not
Right.
reread my work, etc. So really that was the writing process for me, is very much planter. I know
Yeah.
some people are more planner or more pantser, but I'm
Yeah.
definitely a mix between.
Yeah. No, that's one of the great things is I have been toying with this idea. I have some really crazy dreams, and I had some recent
Yes,
encouragement from my friend being like, "You need to like write this stuff down."
yes, write it
And I think I get so overwhelmed by, like, the idea of fleshing out a story, so
down.
I that seems to be a common theme from a few,
Mhm.
amazing authors that I've talked to, especially, their, like, debut novel is, like, just start, and then you'll start
Yes.
figuring it out and getting there.
The best advice I ever got, because once I started finally deciding, okay, I'm going to take me being an author more seriously, because I
Yeah.
was writing short stories, I was submitting to magazines, but it was kind of something like, I was like, I don't know if I'm ready to put it out there yet. I kind of want to just like keep it as my secret little side hustle thing.
Yeah.
But once I was finally ready, like, no, I got to take this seriously. I got to take me seriously. Like
Mhm.
all this other stuff, I started making a lot of author friends. And the best advice that a lot of them would say is, you just have to start. You have to start. Your first draft is going to be like roadkill. It
Yeah.
is going to be awful. It is going to be a steaming pile of garbage.
Yeah.
But in editing is where the magic happens,
Yeah.
especially as you start going through different drafts of it. And oh my gosh, that is so true. Because when I finished my first draft, like I could see the story there, but
Yeah.
it still was like, it's just not there. I don't understand. And they're like, revise it and just keep doing it, and you're going to see.
Mhm.
And this particular story I went through, my goodness, before it even made it to my editor, I went through at least like 5 or 6 different drafts. And then,
Wow.
yeah, 5 or 6 different drafts. And then I sent it to my editor once I felt like, okay, I've done everything I could from my
Yeah.
lens. It is your turn, pass the torch. So,
Amazing, amazing. Okay, and so the novel that we're talking about is
yes.
Blood of the Blackthorn. Can you give a spoiler-free synopsis for anyone who might be interested who hasn't checked it out yet?
Yes, of course. So, Blood of the Blackthorn is really about 2 sisters who were torn apart at a very young age, and they are now in different warring kingdoms. One is been raised as a witch, whereas the other has been raised as a mortal. And the one who has been raised as a mortal, her name is Eve, and this is book 1. So, book 1 follows her story.
Mhm.
And Eve is essentially in a mortal kingdom, which is very much anti witchcraft. They have witch burnings. They do not believe in magic. But one day, some stuff starts to happen and she starts realizing that she has magic. And oh, by the way, she is also in the royal court. So it's getting harder and harder to hide. I wonder how that'll turn out for her. So,
There you go.
yeah.
Amazing, amazing. Okay, so now um we're gonna switch into the like spoiler portion of talking about specific
Okay.
aspects of the book. So
Yes.
if you have not read this yet, but this sounds like something you would love to check out, great place to pause, come back after you've read the book, and then we can continue on with the discussion. But probably so it's even I've been dying to get to this part because even as you were talking about your writing process, the one thing that I really wanted to know is like right off the bat, we get multiple POV. And
Yeah.
I am so terrible at like names and people. And I fumbled through the first few chapters, but you did so good at like getting the story straight. I felt very confident about who was who and what was going on. Um, so, I mean, obviously, knowing the story, I understand, but I would love to get maybe your perspective on why you formatted it that way.
So, what's so funny is at the beginning, the first draft, it actually wasn't going to be multi POV. It was
Oh,
going to
okay.
be third person from Eve's perspective, however. And then
Gotcha.
as I was going through, I was like, there is just so much information that these other
Yeah.
characters have, and they're so important. So then I was telling myself, okay, maybe I'll just do it duo POV, like maybe from her perspective and Clarissa's, because Clarissa's, from the Witch Kingdom, and obviously Eve's not there. So like Clarissa can provide a good perspective. And then I was going through, maybe it was my second or third draft, and I was like, oh, but I want to see Theo's perspective because
Mhm.
Theo's the love interest. And then and then it was one of those things where as I was writing and putting the scenes together, I was like, you know what? I have to commit. This has to be multi POV because
Mhm.
you get so many. I mean, really, you watch a TV show, let's say you watch Rain or The Tudors or whatever,
Mhm.
medieval type of shows out there, and it's always multi POV if you think about it. Sure, you're following one specific character for the majority of the time, but other information is provided by these other characters. And I felt,
Mhm.
especially in an adult fantasy, I was like, I feel very confident that I can tell the whole story if I'm able to showcase it from the
Mhm.
perspective of these different characters that definitely play a role in how Eve's storyline is taking a turn.
Yeah, yeah, and I really commend you on that because I also have sometimes experienced when it's even like dual POV or multiple POV, kind of
Mm.
this like wanting to get back to the main character.
Yeah.
But the way that this was spread out, like everything, I was never bored because everyone had such great storylines. And I was like, oh my gosh, yes,
It's
we're
good to
here.
hear.
Okay, now we're here. Yeah.
What's so
Um,
funny is I sent the book out to the ARC readers,
mhm.
and I was even nervous because I was like, oh, multi POV is always a hard one, right? Because
Yeah.
as you were saying earlier, with multi POV, sometimes you could get lost, or you could be like, oh, I hate this character. Let me just like flip the
Yeah.
pages ahead. But I got really good feedback on multi POV, and what's so funny is one of the characters, which I think only has maybe like 5 or 6 chapters in their POV. I
Mhm.
got the most feedback on. They were like, I want more about this character. The character is Dakan.
Uh-huh.
And they were like, oh my God, I'm so in love with Dakan. Like, I just want to hear more from his perspective. And I was like, okay, that's good to hear. Cause you just don't know at the end of the day. What sounds good
Yeah.
to me or my editor when it's out there in the world could be something completely different to readers.
Right, exactly. And so like I say, I tend to be not hesitant, but I like to follow a main character, and like I said, I just think this was done so well that I enjoyed everyone's stories thoroughly, and I was never the pacing was quicker, kind of flipping in between the different people, and that's what kept it interesting, and everything felt like it was moving. I wasn't missing anyone for too long.
Yeah.
But it's funny that you bring up Dakan because my next question was like, who is your favorite character to write? Because him and do you say Pazel?
Oh, Pazel.
Pazel, loved them. Like
Oh,
absolutely
you know
amazing.
what's so funny too is like, again, this is why the advice is always to keep doing drafts and keep revising,
Mhm.
because Pazel was not like, before I even sent it to the editor, I was like, I don't even know if I want Patel in there. There were like some scenes. I even had more scenes with him. And I was like, I
Yeah.
don't know if I want to add him. I don't know if I want to kill him off, like I don't know what I want to do with him
Yeah.
yet. But there was one scene as I was just kind of letting the writing juices flow.
Mhm.
And it was particularly the scene where he is essentially along with Dakan on to go save Eve, essentially.
Mhm.
And they're like
Mhm.
going through the tunnels, and he's just like kind of like peeking through the tunnels, like, oh, how long have you known this is here? Like, and he's just like going through and just being nosy. And I don't know why I was writing it. And I was like, I really like this character. He's just so funny. So if you're asking as far as like side characters I really liked writing, I will say Pascal definitely like grabbed a hold of my heart for sure at the end of the day. And then him and Dakon's little banter, because they're so different but so similar, is
Mhm.
just so hilarious. So then I remember going back, rereading my entire draft, and was like, I want to insert Dakani or Pascal here. I want to insert him here, here, here. And that was probably like, out of everything, that was probably like my biggest like accomplishment, because I was like, he definitely needed more for sure.
Mhm.
So maybe book two. Who knows? We'll
Yeah, I'm
see.
glad. Thank you. Thank you for bringing him in because it was absolutely hilarious and definitely by the end when they were going to go rescue Eve, just fell in love with him even more.
He's definitely one of those characters that's just like, he brought the comic relief very much.
Yes. Yeah. You need that. It's nice when
Yeah.
everyone is like, Eve's running for her life and everything's going very crazy and to add that in. But yeah, what about any of the more like central kind of main cast of characters?
I will say, I loved writing Eve. And I honestly loved writing Dakan. It was my
Yeah.
second favorite. It was like, again, like a lot of these characters you don't think about. It's not until you do a reread, you're like, huh,
Mhm.
they had a witty line here. Like, I wonder how much more we can expand on that. Um, I loved writing, again, like these are all my characters that I made up from my mind. So, of course, I
Mhm.
love writing them. But I will say, I did really like Clarissa a
Mhm.
lot, because she offers this very enriching perspective from obviously not even a different culture, but a completely different like area and like
Yeah.
people and the way of living. And I felt that without her perspective, there would have been a lot missing in this book for sure. Like
Mhm.
I feel like the dots wouldn't have connected if it was solely Eve's perspective on this, because people wouldn't have understood
Right.
like how important, let's say the Witch Kingdom's culture was to them, and how much it was intense upon their survival, and how dire things really were for them.
Mhm. Yeah, that makes sense. Um, what was both your favorite scene to write and most challenging scene to write?
Okay. So my favorite scene, and it was okay, so my favorite scene to write was one of the first scenes I ever wrote before I even knew what this book was going to be about. And it
Mhm.
was the ballroom scene. I absolutely loved writing the ballroom scene. I feel like every girl that's into romantic fantasy, romantasy, whatever it is, always is in love with ballroom scenes. And it's because
Mhm.
of movies we grew up with. I mean, think about it, like Anastasia, you have, The Princess Diaries, etc. So like anyways, let me get into the point. But the ballroom scene was probably my favorite because it kind of very much shows the tension between Theo and Eve, while also simultaneously displaying that they both know that they can't go further in that moment, right?
Mhm.
It's very much like, well, this is it. Like that's what they're saying. Like, okay, well, this is it. This is the end. This is all that's gonna be.
Mhm.
But I also loved, and it's so funny because I want people to hate this character, obviously, but Mark is.
Oh, yeah. Mhm.
But I also loved him interjecting too, because it has to, like, something has to stop it, right? Like it
Right.
kind of felt like one of those moments where like someone has the water squirter and they're like, hey, stop it.
Yeah, right. Yes.
um so that was one of like my favorite scenes to write, was just like the ballroom
Mhm.
scene, because it was just a lot of fun to write.
Yeah, yeah.
um the most challenging, which was also one of the first scenes I ever wrote too, was King Eric's point of view. He has only one point of view in there, and it was essentially going back in time
Mm.
to
Mhm.
where he was crowned king, and what really happened with the Enchantress. That
Right.
was a very challenging scene to write, because obviously the subject matter, but at the same time, it's like, okay, I want to make sure I take time and care with this, because I also don't want to go over here traumatizing readers either. But I
Right.
want to make sure that like the subtleties are very much known, and how someone like him can tell themselves or convince themselves of like a whole relationship that wasn't even existing, and
Yes.
then convince themselves simultaneously like, oh, she did it to me because she's a witch, she
Mhm.
made me fall in love with her, she's the one who did this, and lacks complete accountability of their role in the disaster they made, essentially. So that was
Yes.
so challenging. I would come back to that scene often.
Mhm.
I wrote it, and then I'd be like, okay, I need a break from it. Let me go write some like funner scenes. And then I would come back.
Yeah.
And even after I had my editor look at it, I still did a couple rounds of like little self edits with it too. Cause I was like, I just want to make sure that, one, it's not traumatizing readers, but second, that like it gets the point across.
Mhm.
So,
Yeah, yeah. I'm so glad that you mentioned that as well, that scene, and the care that you took with it. And also, on a much lighter note, I think that was a theme that I noticed, especially in my early 20s when, having friends, we would have different accounts of things and kind of like realizing some
yeah.
of us are creating our own realities that are
Yes.
quite different than what maybe other people have experienced. Yeah.
I'm so happy you said that, because that was kind of something I was trying to put across too, is that like, whether in society, whether it's with friend groups, whether it's with breaking relationships, whatever it is, there's
Right.
always two sides to the story, and then there's the truth.
Mhm.
And I will say very much so, like that POV is his POV for a reason, you know, and it's not me condoning at all any of his, because he's a scumbag. Absolutely. Is one of
Yes,
the
agreed.
condoning at all. And it's more
Yeah.
just displaying how like he convinced himself of
Mhm.
what was going on, when in reality it was nothing like that. And I'm sure any
Yeah.
reader reading it can completely see through it. Like, no, you're just a psycho.
Yeah, yeah, and that's one of the things that I love about that's why I'm firmly in the romantasy genre and just, like, fantasy in general of, taking these worlds and these situations that seem so unlikely, but still having the same underlying issues with power and abuse of power and, you know, lack of accountability and all those things where, um, unfortunately, you know, we don't have an island of witches here as far as I know, but like
Reveal
that
yourself.
that is very much a thing that I think people can relate to. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I also pulled two quotes that I think that stood out to me, and again, relating it to our mortal realm of kind of encapsulating the theming of the book. And the first one is everyone who is not us is our enemy. And then later on, when Eve is getting her powers and everything, and it says, "For fire is not meant to cower in the dark, but to burn bright in spite of it." So I just was curious around what that messaging meant to you, like in your experience. Why is this important to you?
Yeah. I think the first quote was Mark, I believe, when him and
Yeah.
Theo are having that very tense moment. And I like to think of Mark. Somebody wrote a review and I loved it because they wrote, Mark reminds me so much of Aemon from House of Dragon. Never
Yeah.
would have crossed my mind
Right.
ever. And once they made the connection, I was like, oh my God, I cannot unsee it. But in that thread though, in that specific quote, Mark is essentially he's a very paranoid individual,
Mhm.
and is very, spoiler, it is very much, especially even in that paragraphs of the dialogue, is very much known that he sees what's going on, aka he also controls like the tunnels, he knows what's happening, he knows like all the gossip, all the fodder, etc. And it's because he's very paranoid. He knows that he wants to take over the kingdom. He knows he's the youngest brother and he has two other brothers standing in his way. So when he says something to Theo, or when he says that quote to Theo, as far as, um, everyone who isn't us is the enemy, he's not really telling Theo. It's almost like he's telling himself.
Mhm.
Excuse me. It's almost like he's actually telling himself, and he's kind of like projecting that onto Theo, because he already knows, like, one way or another, I'm going to get that crown. I'm going to be the one who's crowned. Both my brothers can like kick rocks or whatever.
Mhm.
So that's why it was very important to me, especially that quote, is because it kind of showcases very much his paranoia, his power hungriness, but also kind of like he's starting to unravel a bit. And he's very much starting to show his like interior on the outside. Um, and it's very like, if you're there and you're Theo and he has like a knife to your neck, he's saying things like that. Like, I don't know about you. I wouldn't feel safe. I wouldn't feel like he's talking to me. I wouldn't be like, oh yeah, brother, we're on the same team there. Yeah.
Right.
Great. Way to
Good
go.
luck, we're the same.
Good thing. I'd be over here like, oh my God, this boy is crazy, because he
Yeah.
is.
Mhm.
So
Mhm.
that was the first quote. And then the second one, that was a line I added at the very end. I think it was right before I sent it to my editor. So the last draft I had before I sent it to my editor,
Mhm.
I was rereading the ending, and I ended the ending initially with her just standing with the fire in her palm, and everyone kneeling, and the captain kind of just being like in awe of her power. And I kind of ended it there, and I was like, okay, it's a little abrupt. Let's like
Mhm.
clean it up a bit. Let's explain a little. Um, Not because I didn't think the readers wouldn't understand, but because I feel like you gotta have some flowers, and in the art of
Yes.
writing, right? You gotta
Yeah.
like end it nicely. And so I was thinking about it and I was like, why is her showing her power important? Why, especially for her, as we know through reading the book, Eve is very much more fire based and Clarice is more water. Why is it important that she's showing her fire now? Why can't it just be that she's doing a power play to the captain because she can
Mhm.
somewhat control it? Um, and then I thought to myself, it was really because throughout this whole journey we took with Eve, she very much was someone who was like, okay, I want to fall in line. I want to, like, very much spoiled. Like, I want to get my prince. I want to make sure I have
Mhm.
all my jewels. I want to live richly and happily for the rest of my life. And that was kind of all she saw for herself. And she was
Mhm.
kind of like hiding who she actually was the entire time until it got to the point where she could no longer hide it anymore. And when it talks about, because fire is not meant to you cower in the dark, essentially, it's burning bright in spite of
Mhm.
it. It's kind of showing that even when everything is all consuming and trying to smother you, that like you can still burn bright, you could still show yourself, you could still be who you want to be authentically. And it doesn't matter how much things are trying to smother you in the darkness, it's gonna come out. It's gonna be okay.
Yeah, yeah, I love that. And
Yeah.
that's essentially what I took from it, and that's why those 2 quotes especially
Yeah.
popped out to me because again, relating it to real life where, there's this kind of on a bigger scale,
Mhm.
fear of, people who are different, right?
Yeah.
And that could go back to a lot of problems that we've had in
Woo!
the past, but
Yeah.
as well as just like, kind of this fear in ourselves of being different as well. And like, oh
Mhm.
my gosh, what are other people going to think of me or whatever? And we
Yes.
tend to like dim our own light because we want to fit in or
Mhm.
whatnot. And changing the narrative of that, of like burning bright and kind of embracing your differences and like
Yeah.
your unique qualities. So I love that. Okay, let's talk about the ending. So, as you mentioned, there was kind of a couple different things happening, and even and you said there was some changes to make it not so
Mhm.
abrupt. I would love from your words, kind of where all the pieces of the board end, and kind of leading into what if there's anything you could tell us about the next book? What I see that the chess piece is all set up, things are happening. So
Yes.
yeah,
Okay, so initially, the last chapter wasn't going to be there. It was just going to end on Eve's chapter, and that was it. And
right.
then I was writing one day, and I was like, I literally wrote, and I, by the way, love your libraries. Most of this book I wrote in the library because I was like, I got to get out of the house. Let me
Oh
just go
yeah.
somewhere new. So I would go to my library. Love the library. Um, and I was in the library and I was just typing like, some like edits on other things. And then finally it just kind of occurred to me like, well, we don't know what happened with the boat scene. Like I could wait till book 2 to do that. And then some little small voice in me was like, but do we have to? So I was like, okay, let me test out a couple like lines and see. And it literally went from like a line or two about them just kind of like making it back. And I was like, okay, I'll just do an epilogue with that, with a couple of lines about how they made it back to the ship. But then
Mhm.
finally, the character we all love to hate, which I actually really like to write because I
Yeah.
hate him too. I was like, but then Mark's character, it's one of those things we as writers like to joke about a lot, where like the characters will definitely dictate. Like we will want the characters to do something, but the
Mhm.
characters will dictate to us, like, no, I want to do this instead. And that was
Ah.
definitely a case of that where Mark was he was on the beach and then oh he's killing someone on the beach and oh he's being crowned and then like I was like oh but then what about Callum and then I literally started typing in a whirlwind before I knew it like 3 4 hours had passed and I had completed that chapter and I was like I need this chapter has to be the ending like as much
Mhm.
as I love Eve's ending, I feel like Mark's final chapter kind of ties things together a bit and sets up a lot of ominousity for the next book too, because you're just over here like, oh my God, this guy is a psycho. And now
Yeah.
he got what he wanted. Oh my
Yeah.
goodness, what's going to happen in book 2? I got to know. So I, yeah, I had to do it. But poor Callum, I love Callum so much. And he's been through the ringer. So
Yeah. Oh
Yeah.
my gosh. I forgot to put that in my notes, but oh my goodness, him and Eve having their little moment where he's like, you know what? Because he loved somebody else, but he's like,
Yeah.
I also made a vow to you, and I love you, and like
Yeah.
I thought that was so beautiful.
And like it just shows his character. Like, some people, some people think like you go to have heroes and villains or anti-heroes only. And I'm like, sometimes you just have a good person. You have a
Yeah.
good person that's just like wrapped up in all this nonsense, deadly nonsense. And like he's just trying to be a good person. And he can just be a good person without ulterior motives or
Mhm.
anything like that. And it's Callum is definitely one of my favorite characters. Not even just to write, but just like in my heart. I'm like, I have a very soft, it might not seem like it, I know. But like I have a very soft spot for Callum, and I
Yeah.
definitely have plans for him in book two for sure.
Oh,
Um, goodness. But yeah, Callum.
yeah, yeah. No, I do appreciate the ending because when he, like, sacrificed himself, I was like, "That's it. He was a great guy. I loved him. That's it." So, glad to know. I mean, granted, he's not in the best of circumstances right now,
Yeah.
but I have somewhat confidence that being a great guy might help him out eventually somewhere,
For sure.
someplace. Yeah. Oh, amazing. Okay, so is there anything you can kind of give us hints on where the next book, what direction it might be going?
So, book one is definitely more predominantly from Eve's perspective. So,
Mhm.
book two, on the other hand, is going to be more predominantly from Clarissa's perspective.
Oh,
Definitely
okay.
showing more of the covens, how they work, more of the magic system.
Mhm.
And obviously, that we'll still see the same multi POVs from the different characters. And yeah, after I wrote multi POV, this one is as trepidatious as it was for me to like be like, okay, I'm releasing into the world. I was
Yeah.
also very happy with my decision to do it. So going into book two, knowing I have this like
Mhm.
full cast of characters that are right there and ready to be played with, it's
Mhm.
so exciting. There's definitely going to be two more POVs added for sure.
Ooh,
So
okay.
I'm so 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 excited for that.
Yeah.
And yeah, pretty much it's going to be more from Clarissa's perspective. My goal right now, because I already kind of have very loosely planned how the entire story is going to end. And
Okay.
I am thinking about it being more of a trilogy because I feel like it's
Okay.
like, okay, book one's Eve, more Eve's perspective. Book two's more Clarissa's perspective. And then book three is kind of going to be the culmination of everything. We'll
Oh,
see
okay.
how it turns out. My cats are fighting, but it's like, why are you guys fighting? Anyways, but yeah, so that's for book two is definitely going to be more magic system, more of the covens, more kind of going into Clarissa's like way of seeing things versus Eve's, but Eve will still definitely be there, so don't you worry.
Yeah. Oh, I'm not worried at all. I trust the pacing immensely. Like I said, I am terrible with people and names and stuff, and I think like you did it so well that I had such a clear picture of everyone and their journey, and so again, commend you on that.
Yay.
Um, yeah, do you have like I know this book is literally just coming out, so absolutely no pressure and no rush. Do you have any idea of like what timeline you're aiming for?
My goal is to release book two by October.
Okay.
So I'm already writing book two right now. I don't know why I
Yeah.
pointed this way. Yeah, as if you could see my computer. My computer's over here.
Just
But
over here.
um book two, I'm already writing it right now. It's due to my editor, I think she's June. So
Mhm.
I only have 4 more months, maybe less, to write the rest of it, but I am really so excited. And especially because I feel like with my debut, it was very difficult because it was a lot of learning the ropes and a lot of like, I definitely was a short story writer for magazines. So I was writing a bunch of short stories, and it's just a different beast handling like
Mhm.
a full length novel that's almost 100,000 words, as any writer could probably tell you. So for me, learning the ropes of like, okay, a story that can sustain over like so many words and chapters was definitely difficult at first. But now that I'm kind of in the groove of it, I feel like book two is definitely going to be a lot easier as far as like the writing process and stuff goes. And it already is. So I'm excited.
Yeah, yeah. Oh, I'm excited now that I'm so attached to everyone. Yeah, I'm excited.
Thank you.
Do you have any other like storylines or books kind of on the horizon that you could see yourself writing someday, maybe?
I think in the background, like I said, before I even started this one, I had like 25, 30 works in
Yeah,
progress. So like
you have so many.
and I'm definitely multi-genre author. So
Okay.
like when I would write stories for magazine, it was very much like, okay, what am I feeling in the moment? So I did some
Yeah.
romance, I did some paranormal subplots, I did literary fiction. And so this is my first fantasy that I'm writing. I love reading fantasy, but it was the first that I
Mhm.
wrote. So in the background, I definitely have a couple more books that I'm kind of writing either romance or literary fiction that I'll probably release like in between, this series and stuff like that.
Mhm.
Um, one of which I hopefully plan to get around like this like September timeframe. If all goes well, fingers crossed. We'll see.
Yeah, yeah.
So
Makes sense. Okay,
yeah.
awesome, awesome. Do you have any, like, bookish events that you're going to or any other, like, I don't know, exciting stuff you're looking forward to
Yeah.
this year?
I'll be at Blood and Bone Ball. That's gonna be over in Iowa, and then I have the Once Upon a Convention. That's going to be a fantasy book convention in Maryland, and then
Okay.
that both of those are going to be during the summer. So one's going to be in like July, the other's going to be in August.
Mhm.
So that's going to be a lot of fun, especially
Yeah.
because I'm like, yeah, this is so exciting. In Austin, I'm going to be my book is chosen as a book club of the month pick for April. So I'll be
Oh,
visiting
awesome.
Birdhouse Books. Love
Yeah.
Birdhouse Books. Shout out to them. Be visiting Birdhouse Books for their April book club of the month. And yeah, as far as that goes, like it's just busy. Once the summer hits, I'm just gonna be like here and there everywhere.
Yep,
It's
yep.
a lot.
I feel
But
that.
it's exciting. It's a good a lot.
Yes, yeah, that's always nice. I feel that way, especially in Florida. I feel like everything happens in, like, I think what normal people experience as fall. It's not really fall here, but like those few months of like August, September, October, everything's always
hmm
like bam, bam, bam.
Yes.
Which is also funny because it's our hurricane season and like things get
You're like,
I went
please.
yeah, no, last year I went to Romantasy Con in
Yeah.
Orlando, and the day I came home from that, I packed up and evacuated for the hurricane that was coming.
Oh
Like it
my
was all in
God.
the same day. It was crazy. Everything's okay,
I
luckily,
was gonna
but
ask.
yes,
Yeah. Okay.
yes.
Good to hear
No,
you're
we
good.
that was my first time ever that we've had a direct hit to our area.
Yeah.
And also now as a homeowner, it was very stressful, but totally okay, luckily. So all good. But now I'm like hyper aware of things being planned in that time
Yeah.
because I'm like, "Oh, guys, let's do
You're
like the
like,
spring or something." Yeah, but that is awesome. It has been so great chatting with you. I'm
thank
always so
you.
excited. It's the book community is so amazing. Like, I
Yes.
mention this every time that a lot of these conversations are the first time I'm actually, like, speaking with someone outside of, like, maybe a couple emails or a couple DMs, and
Yeah.
everyone is just always amazing, and it has been so exciting to kind of get, like, a behind the scenes look on why things are the way they are in the books. Yeah,
hmm
yeah, I appreciate it.
Oh my God, I appreciate you too. Like I said, I listened to your podcast and I was like, oh my God, it's so exciting. Like I love the book community in general because even before I decided to take my work seriously, like I say they as everybody, like, was just so open. There was no like gatekeeping. It was very much like, oh, you're an upcoming author. Here's like some advice and here's some tips. And like, even the readers were like, I like reading these kinds of books. These are things that'll turn me off. Or like, you know what I'm saying? It's just everybody was just so kind. I know we have little outliers here and there, but ultimately, like, overall, the book community is just so nice. They embrace like newcomers, and it's not like, oh, well, you're not part of our club kind of thing. So I really love that.
Yeah, there's definitely a view of, like, everyone can win. Like,
Yes, you
it's
have
never like
space.
yes, exactly. I'm part of a group that has, I think at this point, over, like, 75
Oh my
book podcasts, and
nice.
it's never felt like, "Oh my gosh, we're doing the exact same thing," or whatever. It's just kinda like we can all help each other, and, like, that's the
Yeah.
magic of books. Um, yeah, so I know that you mentioned earlier, advice around the, like, writing process of just start. Is there any other advice you would wanna give to anyone looking to write their debut novel?
Oh my goodness. Do as much research and talk to other authors for sure. I can't think off the top of my head any single author where I would reach out to them, whether in DMs or email or whatever, where they were like, nope, I don't want to talk to you. No, I
Yeah.
don't want to give advice. Like every single one of them, whether it's on social media, email, DM, whatever it is, like they were so open, they were so honest. That is my biggest advice is start networking and start talking to other authors and asking their opinions as well, because they will have a plethora of advice, and you might feel overwhelmed with advice, but you just got to like, okay, what works for me, right? Because like I said earlier, I'm a planter, and that might not work for some people, and that's completely fine. You'll find your author who's a planner, you'll find your author who's a pantser, and it'll completely work out for you. But that's probably my biggest advice. Network, talk to other authors, talk to other writers, and kind of like build that community within. And the bookish community is honestly the best place to start.
Mhm. Yeah, I love that. I don't think I've ever heard it phrased that way of, like, ask advice, but also take a minute to, like, discern whether that is
Yeah.
right for you to follow. I think that's a
Mhm.
step that I haven't always put together, you know?
Yeah, I can't imagine anyone being like, "You didn't follow my advice. How dare you?" Like, because that's what it is.
Yeah.
It's just tips, you know?
Yeah, yeah. No, absolutely, absolutely. So, yeah, thank you again. Could you let everyone know where is best to find you? Obviously, I'll put all of your stuff down in the description, but,
Yeah.
yeah.
Best to find me would be Instagram or Threads. I do have a TikTok. Probably need to pay more attention to that.
Fair.
Same handle at Rocio Carranza Writes. And really, that's it for social media. I do have a website, www.rociocarranza.com. That's also where you can find all my social media handles and if you need to contact me or anything like that.
Perfect. Awesome. Well, thank you so much for
Hey,
your
thank
time.
you.
I appreciate it, and I will definitely have to have you back as we, like, continue on this journey. That is
Yes.
one of my favorites as well. I'm doing that with a few other authors of like, okay, so when the next book comes out, you're gonna come back.
Yes, of course. Yeah.
Oh, I appreciate it. All right. If you've made it to this point in the episode, thank you so much for watching. I'd be incredibly grateful if you showed some support either by following or subscribing, depending on what platform you're watching on, and leaving a comment. You can always follow me on Instagram at Busy Reading Romantasy or on TikTok at busy reading romantasy to see what I'm up to. You can also email me at busyreadingromantasy@gmail.com to tell me your thoughts, dreams, secrets, or if you just have any book and author suggestions you'd love me to cover. Grab yourself a good book, get cozy. I'll see you next Wednesday for a new episode.